On a serene afternoon in a quiet Charlotte park, a young boy, raised by his sightless grandfather, was engrossed in a book on a weathered bench when a sudden snarl shattered the calm. A massive dog had broken free and was racing toward a small girl. Without a moment's pause, he sprinted to her, shielding her with his body and sustaining serious injuries. Unbeknownst to him, the girl's mother was a renowned poet, whose words would transform his selfless act into a verse that stirred an entire country. Before we unfold this tale, let us know where you're tuning in from. We'd love to hear your reflections. It was a tranquil afternoon on the fringes of Charlotte, the kind that felt like a gentle melody, with crimson leaves drifting lazily from the ancient branches of sycamore trees, settling onto the meandering trails of the town park. The park was rarely bustling at this hour, just a few older folks ambling along, children with their caregivers, and the occasional cyclist pedaling by with earbuds in. Tucked near a shaded bench beneath a towering elm that had witnessed countless untold tales, sat a boy who arrived every day with unwavering routine. His name was Jamal, a wiry, introspective 12-year-old with a warm complexion and eyes that gleamed with wisdom beyond his age. Dressed in second-hand clothes, neatly pressed but worn at the edges, he always carried a tattered paperback with dog-eared pages and notes scrawled in the margins. That day, like countless others, he perched cross-legged on the bench, reading softly to his grandfather, Mr. Amos, who, though blind, insisted he could feel the essence of a story as long as Jamal's voice brought it to life. Mr. Amos had been Jamal's guardian since he was 4. After his parents perished in a tragic fire he could scarcely recall. His grandfather's hair was a soft grey, like the hush of twilight, and though he moved slowly with a walking stick, he carried a quiet resilience, honed by years of facing life's trials with grace. Each afternoon, Jamal would gently lead him to their bench, read from a book he'd found at the library's donation bin, and guide him back to their modest home before evening. Their life was simple, a small clapboard house on the edge of town, with a yard full of wild daisies, but they had their rituals and each other. Not far from where Jamal read, a young girl with auburn braids skipped along the stepping stones by the pond. She was barely 7, clad in a soft blue dress and scuffed sneakers that shone like polished coins. Her name was Sophie Callahan, and though she'd only arrived in the neighborhood 3 weeks prior, she was a puzzle to the other children, rarely seen outdoors. Her mother, Eleanor Callahan, a celebrated poet who had retreated from fame after her husband's passing, had moved here to shield Sophie from the clamor of the world and the weight of a home filled with lingering grief. Sophie had noticed Jamal before, once from the back seat of their car, as they drove past the park, another time from the porch of their rented cottage overlooking the northern woods. There was something in the way he cradled his book, the way his voice wove stories like a melody for Mr. Amos, that drew her closer each day. She'd linger behind trees, pretending to hunt for ladybugs, just to listen a little longer. She admired how he spoke each word with care, as if every phrase held a pulse. And though they'd barely locked eyes, she'd decided in the private corners of her heart that he was like the heroes in the bedtime stories. Her father once told, quiet, steadfast, and perhaps a touch enchanted. That afternoon, as the sun sank lower, bathing the park in shades of gold and lavender, Jamal was reading a tale of a valiant sailor who saved an island with nothing but bravery and compassion. Sophie, nearby, sat on the grass, arranging pebbles in neat rows, though her ears were attuned to his voice. Mr. Amos, with a gentle smile, leaned back as if savoring the breeze, though his eyes could no longer see it. The air was still, the moment serene, as if time had paused to rest. But peace is fleeting, and some stories arrive with a snarl, closer than anyone could foresee. The snarl emerged from the far end of the trail, low and menacing, like the rumble of thunder just beyond the hills. It cut through the park's quiet with a jarring edge, unnatural and sharp. Jamal lowered his book, his brow creasing as he tilted his head. Mr. Amos's smile faded. his voice a faint murmur. "Jamal, what's that noise?" But Jamal didn't reply immediately, his gaze sweeping the horizon, settling on a blur of motion near the shrubs where the path curved past the pond. What he saw stole his breath. A hulking mastiff, sinew taut and eyes wild with frenzy, had broken free, likely from a nearby estate, where guard dogs were kept more for status than care. It tore down the path, a loose collar jangling, saliva dripping from its jaws. Adults scattered, scooping up their children, spilling water bottles and picnic bags in their haste. Sparrows near the benches took flight in a frantic burst. But amidst the chaos, one figure stood still, small, wide-eyed, oblivious to the danger, hurtling toward her. Sophie, she'd risen to chase a butterfly. When the world erupted, she turned, catching sight of the dog's charging form, and froze, fear rooting her to the spot. Her lips parted, but no sound escaped. Her arms dangled uselessly. She didn't cry out. She didn't flee. She simply stared. Jamal didn't pause to think. He didn't glance around for help. He didn't wait. His book slipped from his hands, pages fluttering to the ground like scattered petals, and he bolted down the path. Sneakers pounding the pavement in desperate rhythm, Mr. Amos called out, his voice a mix of worry and confusion. But Jamal was already gone, driven by a primal urge, a courage that acted before it could be named. He reached Sophie just as the dog leaped, its massive form airborne, teeth glinting. Snarl now, a thunderous roar. He didn't shield himself. He pivoted, wrapping his arms around Sophie, twisting, so she was tucked safely behind him. The impact hit like a storm, knocking the breath from his chest, and sending both children sprawling onto the grass. Jamal held tight, rolling once, twice, until his back struck the pond's stone edge. The dog's jaws clamped onto his shoulder, the pain a white-hot blaze that tore a cry from his lips. But he gritted his teeth, tightening his hold on Sophie, who trembled, sobbing into his jacket, too terrified to look. The dog growled, twisting, its teeth sinking deeper, blood seeping through Jamal's sleeve and pooling on the ground. His vision wavered, his ears buzzed, but he didn't let go. He shifted to keep the beast from Sophie's face, curling tighter, his jaw clenched so fiercely it ached. In the pandemonium, voices shouted for help. Someone yelled for animal control. Footsteps thundered as adults hesitated, then acted. A sharp whistle pierced the air, followed by the heavy tread of boots and the clank of a metal pole. A park warden appeared, wielding a catch-pole. In moments, the loop snared the dog's neck, yanking it back with force. The animal thrashed, then was dragged away, leaving a trail of crimson and a heavy silence. Jamal lay still, his face ashen, chest heaving in shallow bursts, while Sophie, still clinging to him, whispered his name through tears, her voice breaking with a child's guilt, for freezing, for being small, for needing rescue.
"Jamal, Jamal!"
she repeated as if the sound could anchor him. He looked at her, lips trembling, eyes soft but weary, and managed a faint smile. "You're safe now. That's enough." Then his head fell back, eyes fluttering shut, as the wail of sirens wove through the trees. The last sound he heard before the world faded. The hospital room was hushed, save for the steady beep of monitors and the faint hum of an air vent overhead, a sound like a whisper in an empty chapel. Jamal lay beneath a thin green blanket, his left arm bandaged and propped up, faint bruises blooming across his side, a small star-shaped cut above his cheek, stitched with care by a nurse who fought back tears. His skin looked pale under the sterile lights, his breath slow, as if even the machines hesitated to disturb him. Beside him sat Mr. Amos, his hand gently cradling Jamal's uninjured fingers, murmuring prayers that wavered with emotion, less a plea than a quiet dialogue with a trusted presence. When the ambulance arrived, few had asked about Jamal. He had no parents to notify, only an elderly grandfather who insisted calmly but firmly on riding with him, refusing to let strangers recount the story. The paramedics, though skilled, seemed unsure what to do with a boy whose name didn't appear on school records or insurance forms. So Jamal, brave and bloodied, was taken to a general ward, placed in a small room at the end of a corridor filled with children, whose parents hovered with armfuls of flowers and balloons. Sophie, though, didn't forget. She trembled for hours, wrapped in her mother's arms under a pile of quilts, her face still streaked with tears. She spoke little at first, only repeating Jamal's name. When Eleanor Callahan finally soothed her with warm tea and a poem read softly, Sophie looked up, her eyes too heavy for her years, and said, "He saved me, Mama, and no one even said thank you." Eleanor fell silent, struck by the weight of her daughter's words. She'd glimpsed the boy as the paramedics carried him away, as Sophie was pressed into her arms. In his face, she saw not fear or anger, but a quiet strength, a dignity that glowed without demanding notice, like a lantern in a shadowed room, and she had turned away. That night, Eleanor sat alone in her study, the lamp dim, clutching a sketch Sophie had made, a pencil drawing of a boy with short curls and a torn jacket, shielding a girl with braids and frightened eyes. Below, in uneven letters, Sophie had written, "Jamal is my hero." Eleanor traced the name, then rose, crossing to the desk where she kept old contacts from her days in the public eye. Her poetry had once captured a nation's heart, born from loss and love. But she'd stepped back when fame became a cage. Now something stirred, a need to honor what was right. By dawn, calls were made, softly at first, then a ripple, then a tide. The hospital's administrator received a courteous but firm inquiry about a boy named Jamal, admitted after a dog attack, recovering in pediatrics without coverage. His room was upgraded. A dedicated nurse was assigned. Soon the story reached the media, not because of Jamal, but because Eleanor Callahan, the elusive poet of 2 best-selling collections and a decade of silence, had spoken. When reporters arrived, cameras rolling, she didn't speak of herself. She spoke of a boy with eyes like starlight, who faced danger without thought of reward, whose name was unknown but whose heart was boundless. As the story spread, Jamal slept, unaware that the world beyond his window was shifting, not because he sought it, but because someone saw his light and refused to let it dim. He woke 2 days later to the gentle patter of rain against the hospital glass, a soothing rhythm that made the world feel distant and kind. His shoulder throbbed, not sharply, but with the dull ache of healing. He lay still, letting the unfamiliar quiet settle, so different from the creak of his grandfather's porch, the rustle of old magazines, or the faint hymns from a neighbor's radio. Then he heard Mr. Amos's voice, not from across the room, but close, warm and steady, though laced with a rare tremor of feeling. "You came back to me, son," Mr. Amos whispered, his fingers brushing Jamal's hair with the care of someone who'd lost too much to take love lightly. "I knew you would. I told them so." Jamal turned slowly, still dazed, and saw his grandfather's face, a little wearier than he remembered, but beaming, even in the hospital's stark glow. He smiled back, faint but genuine. He wanted to ask about Sophie, about the dog, but the words tangled, and all he managed was, "You okay, Grandpa?" Mr. Amos chuckled, a soft, teary sound, and nodded. "I am now?" What caught Jamal's eye, more than the monitors or the too-clean room, was a large envelope on the bedside table, beside a stack of cards, some in colored paper, others adorned with glitter and childish drawings, all addressed to him in varied, sometimes wobbly handwriting. "Open it when you feel ready," said a voice from the doorway, smooth and rich, like a well-worn book. Jamal blinked, wondering if the painkillers were playing tricks. There stood a woman he'd seen in bookstore displays, on talk shows at the community center, in faded posters at the library, Eleanor Callahan. But she wore no glamorous attire, just a simple cardigan and a look that said, gratitude in ways words couldn't. "I'm sorry I didn't come sooner," Eleanor said, stepping closer. "I didn't know how to express what needed saying." She set a small fabric-wrapped item on the nightstand. "That's a journal," she explained. "Sophie said you love stories. This one holds yours." Before Jamal could ask, Eleanor touched the journal, and Sophie's voice emerged, soft but clear, recounting the day, how Jamal protected her, how he stood firm, bleeding but unyielding, promising it would be okay. Jamal looked away, shy, unused to such praise. Eleanor leaned closer, her voice firm. "You're the bravest soul I've ever known, Jamal. Braver than I could ever be. My daughter is here because of you, and the world deserves to know." She nodded toward the cards. "They're from people everywhere. Some don't even know your name yet, but they will. With shaky hands, Jamal opened one, a note from a girl in Oregon who'd seen his story online, writing, "I want to be as fearless as you." Another from a teacher in Maine, "Thank you for showing us what true courage means." And one in messy crayon from a boy named Lucas, "You're my hero. I want to be like you when I'm big." As rain tapped outside and footsteps echoed in the hall, Jamal sat with the cards, their words warming him like sunlight on chilled skin. Mr. Amos leaned in, kissing his forehead, and whispered, "Sometimes the world notices when you least expect it." In that moment, surrounded by quiet gratitude, Jamal didn't feel small or overlooked. For the first time, he felt seen, honored. The hospital soon felt less like a place of sterile sheets and more like a turning point, a breath before a new verse. Jamal's story spread beyond Charlotte's quiet streets, carried by murmurs that grew into news reports, radio segments, and TV features. Yet none of it changed how he woke each morning, still startled, still puzzled by his sudden fame. His room filled with cards, flowers, and visitors, nurses stopping by just to smile, a custodian slipping him extra juice, a stranger who wept at his bedside, muttering about renewed faith. Jamal didn't know how to respond. He didn't feel heroic, unsure what heroes were meant to feel. He'd only acted because Sophie was in danger, his feet moving before his mind could argue. It wasn't bravery, not the kind lauded on screens. It was instinct, perhaps love, or what Mr. Amos called doing good when no one's looking, because your heart won't allow otherwise. Then came the day that shifted everything. Eleanor returned, this time with Sophie, whose small hand clasped her mother's, her braids tied with a ribbon shaped like a sparrow. She held a package, wrapped in paper creased from careful folding. They entered softly, as if crossing a sacred threshold. Sophie approached the bed, hesitant, her eyes searching, and for a moment neither spoke. Then she stepped forward and offered the bundle. "I made this for you," she said, her voice quiet but sure. Jamal unwrapped it to find a cloak, hand-stitched with uneven seams and vibrant patches, cut from one of Eleanor's old reading tour shirts. Across the back, in sparkling glue and wobbly letters, it read, "My champion." "I didn't know your favorite color," Sophie added, "so I used every one." Jamal stared at the cloak, then at Sophie, his throat too tight for words. He nodded, reaching out to take her hand. She squeezed it, fearless now. Something wordless bound them, a child's gratitude and another's sacrifice, woven into something holy. Eleanor smiled, a warmth that softened the grief long etched in her eyes. "We were hoping," she began, "that when you're well enough, you'd join us for something special." She paused at Jamal's curious look. "I've written a poem, Jamal, about that day, about you. It's not just words, it's a call to act from the heart." Mr. Amos sat taller, his hand still on Jamal's arm. "He's never stood before a crowd," he said, not in protest but as a gentle note. Eleanor nodded. "Nor had I once." The event was arranged swiftly but thoughtfully. Set in the same park, now adorned with a wooden stage, rows of chairs, and fairy lights glowing overhead. The mayor attended, alongside reporters, neighbors, and schoolchildren. Jamal's classmates came, too, some who'd barely noticed him before, drawn by the story of a boy who did what most adults wouldn't. When Jamal stepped onto the stage, guided by Mr. Amos and Sophie, he wore the cloak, its patches fluttering in the evening breeze. He didn't speak at first. Eleanor stood beside him, holding a notebook, then gave him a nod. With the first soft words of her poem, the crowd stilled, titled "The Boy in the Cloak." It was gentle, deliberate, painting Jamal not as a legend, but as a child who chose to act when no one asked. As the final lines faded, the audience rose, not from duty, but because they felt truth in her words. Jamal gazed at the crowd and understood what it meant to be seen, not for what you own or wear, but for who you are when the world looks away. In that moment, with stars above and the cloak brushing his legs, he didn't feel like a boy from the edges of town. He felt like Sophie's drawing, simply, deeply, someone who mattered. Join us to share inspiring stories by clicking like and subscribe. Don't forget to tap the notification bell to begin your day with meaningful lessons and heartfelt connection.